So, Jim, we'll cut straight to the chase. We get a lot of questions and feedback from all your posts online. So what I've done is I've collated a bunch of those questions here on probably three core subjects which we're going to talk about today, which is your faith, which is something we've spoken about a couple of times, but not in depth. The other one is about retirement, because that seems to be very popular at the moment, and people like your attitude, but some people don't as well.
Yeah.
And tall poppy syndrome in regards to success of franchisees and just how people just can't believe it and then they try and shoot it down. So let's start off first with your faith. So maybe you want to tell everyone what do you believe in, what's your faith, and how have you come to that?
I'm a follower of the carpenter, I guess. Follower of Jesus. Christian. It's a commitment thing. It's a loyalty thing. You make a decision that he's going to be my guru, and I just follow him. And I particularly love the Jesus of the Gospels. The man who walked and talked and was fully human.
Now you're an atheist. You made the right decision in my opinion at the start, but now you've gone the other way. So do you want to talk about how did you go from being, because you're a very well-educated science person, so how did you go from that to?
Well, of course, the idea that being well-educated means that you're not Christian is actually not necessarily true. People who are more educated and smarter actually are more likely to be Christian than those who aren't. This is what statistics show, so it doesn't prove anything. But I think I felt a certain interest, a certain emotional attraction to the idea of God, the idea of being a Christian. And I just happened to get to know some Christians at university. It was when I was 28 years old, and I got to like them, and I went around a retreat, and then I had this very strong sense that God spoke to me, and I changed. I just made that commitment, and I changed my life, and it's been a wonderful decision. I always say the two greatest encounters of my life were with God at the age of 28 and with my wife Lee at the age of 48.
Well, how's it changed your life? Because I'm not a man of faith, so how does it change your life from before 28 to after 28? What things were you doing differently?
It gives me a clear sense of how to behave. I suppose there's an absolute basis behind. I mean, the Bible says a lot of different things, but the ethical teachings are very similar. We've got to look after each other, for example. You just don't do the wrong thing. We're all responsible for God. So, yeah, and being part of a community helps too. It's not just a matter of having everybody believes in being, nice to people. It's a principle. But when you go to church every Sunday and you're with other people who believe as you do, and you hear inspiring messages, because they're great at our church. The talks are fantastic. It uplifts you and it strengthens you, and it's easier to live the right kind of life.
What is the right kind of life to you then?
We have a responsibility to other people as much as anything. I mean, we're not selfish. We use what we have for the good of other people. Like I suppose that. I'm not saying I'm anything like perfect, but we do tithe regularly, of course, of our income, which is obviously quite considerable. But also most of our actual income goes towards scientific research. I would feel to make a lot of money, to spend it on, having a luxury yachts and mansions and stuff and expensive cars would be a kind of it's not a good use of what God's given me.
Let's talk about your research then, because I think this is important that people understand, because we get the comment all the time, Jim just gets all franchise fees and doesn't need any more money, all this sort of stuff. So maybe do you want to tell people and educate them give them a background about you.
I did a PhD basically in history when I was like in my 20s, trying to understand the reason for the rise and fall of civilization. And I came to the conclusion that most of what happens in society that affects things like economic growth and a lot of aspects of mental health comes down to biology. And recently it's been clear that that is an epigenetic thing. So the reason that one person is happy, productive, good family member, another person is failure in life, drug addict, whatever, it comes down to epigenetics. So what we're looking at in my research program, which I launched about 10 years ago on a small basis, we're now spending something like $2.5 million a year. We're looking at understanding the epigenetics of social behaviour, particularly using food restriction as a model.
Yeah, biohistory is always where people can learn about it more, but this idea, you've been doing this since, was it when you were in university, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I started thinking about these things when I was 14. I wanted to understand the reason for the rise and fall of civilization. And then when I did my degrees, I came to what I believe is the right conclusion. But it also has a lot of implications. Like, for example, we believe that we can do really effective things to help people overcome problems like drug addiction and alcoholism and those kinds of areas, even obesity, by changing the physiology of the body, by going to these epigenetic pathways. So there's a fairly major project looking at all kinds of ways of doing it. It could be pheromones, it could be using RNA, it could be direct manipulation of the epigenome, like putting on methyl groups or taking them off, this kind of thing. It could be to do with repurposing existing drugs. There's all the different ways of doing it. We're trying multiple approaches to try and find what will work in this. And we'll be able to easily tell. So what will actually come out of it is a medical treatment initially.
Do you want to talk about then, because obviously we're a big company, people expect us, we should just sponsor this place for 100 grand and this place for 200 grand. Do you want to talk about that philosophy, what you've got with?
The person I most admire in the world is Bill Gates. Now, Bill Gates was a brilliant businessman, obviously, but what he did was when he built all these billions of dollars, he said, how can I use this money to help the most people? Things like vaccinations of children and clean energy and clean toilet systems and all kinds of things. He did some amazing, amazing stuff. It's probably saved millions of lives. Now, what he's done is he now devotes his full-time effort just to working out how he could spend his money most effectively. Now, I see exactly the same thing. There are only two ways to spend money for me. One is tithing, because that's a religious obligation, something God asks of us. And the other is looking at my research project, because I believe that is the one thing that will do most to help my fellow human beings. So I actually refuse everything else. Even in the supermarket when they're supposed to give cents of change, I just don't do it, because to me, the trouble with giving things away is if you don't look at where you're going, you're going to be a lot less effective than if you actually try and work out where's the best way to spend money.
So it's that philosophy that's you've had in for a long time.
And people like Warren Buffett does the same thing too. And he was one of the great things about what Bill Gates did is he inspired others, not only just to give, but to give it in the most cost-effective way possible. How can I do the most good? And that's quite a big business. So all the brilliance of this guy building his great company is now built on saying, how can he spend the money most effectively? And that's what I would intend to do. I'm not Bill Gates. I'm not as great as him, of course. But
I was going to say that, but if you do pull it off, maybe don't talk to people about, because obviously people are going, this is a pretty far-fetched sort of idea, but if you did pull it off, what would some of the actual real-life applications be?
Well, like I said, drug addiction is probably the most obvious one. What we would do if we get this thing going is we would get people to be more long-term thinking. The problem with drug addicts and alcoholics and people who overeat and so forth is that they're very focused on the short term, the pleasures of doing it right now, not thinking of what they're going to feel like in a few days' time or a week's time or a month's time or whatever. So it's very short term. What this treatment would do is get people to think long term.
And because this is something you do in your own life, from knowing you do discipline, like you'd make more people more disciplined, but your discipline is you don't miss anything regarding exercise and your weight and stuff. It's pretty remarkable. You're very consistent.
Well, I struggle a little bit with my weight. I'm about 68 kilos now. I should be at 66. But I do run half hour a day and do lots of other exercise as well, and try and eat well. I do 16/8 fasting, which is very helpful. So yeah, I try and live these things. I also try and eat the right kinds of food. I love fruits. Vegetables is a bit more of a struggle. Yeah. I love chocolate too, so
that's your one vice.
It's not always.
But the point of it is your research. If what you're trying to develop, the medicine or the technology would make someone that sort of way more.
Would make it easier to do what I do. Yes. Yeah. Look, at 70 years old, I'm in remarkably good health. I feel full of beans, energy. My mind is springing forth new ideas. Well, you know what I'm like actually. I get talking, I overrun people. I'm just really happy, really effective, really energetic. I really honestly feel just as good as I did when I was 25. Not quite such a strong libido, though. That's the only major difference I noticed. But everything else, I feel super good. And I love other people to have this. It would be so great to be able to help people. It's other things too, like cold showers. I'm a very strong believer in cold showers. Spending time outside, physically exercising outside is really, really good. There's lots of things you can do. And also having strong, good social relationships. There's a lot of things we can do to be happy and healthy.
Now, going back to your faith, with gyms itself, do you want to talk about how did your faith drive how you developed the franchise system, or was it completely independent?
It's integral to the way we think about things. Look, the real, if you looked at the core text behind what gyms does, it's Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And in John's Gospel, he just gives a description. Now, in those days, washing feet was a really gross thing to do. It was something that a very degraded person like a slave would do. And this is a person not considered fully human in that society. So that was a really dirty thing to do, demeaning. Now, occasionally, a very revered rabbi, which obviously Jesus was, his disciples would wash his feet as a sign of respect. What Jesus did, though, he did the opposite. He washed his disciples' feet. And actually, you can tell Peter was shocked at this. He didn't want to. He didn't want him to do it because it was so extraordinary. But that whole idea is that you serve people rather than control them, rather than boss them, is the essence of that story. And the essence that we think of is in gyms. In gyms, the core client is actually the franchisee. And the idea that we serve the franchisee, we have a contract that gives franchisees extraordinary rights, including to me. There's about 1,000 franchisees that are directly looked after by myself, my own company. And if the franchisees don't like the way I'm looking after them, they can simply easily put in a proposal to have me kicked out of it. Now, in practice, what would happen is that I would sack the manager very quickly and get somebody better. But the point of it is, even for myself, I've bound myself to, look, I can't do certain things. People often ask me to do something. I thought, I can't do that. My contracts won't allow me to do that. And then the whole notion, like every franchisee has my phone number and my email address, and they can contact me anytime, after hours, weekends, anytime. I'm always available. They'll often contact me because they can't get onto their franchisor. I don't mind. I'm happy to talk to them. That whole thing, my whole life is dedicated in a business sense to serving my franchisees. That's the core idea. And that's a very Christian notion because it holds the whole sense of hierarchy on its head. I'm not the boss. Franchisees sometimes call me the boss. I'm not your boss. You're my client. I provide a service for you. And if you don't like the service I offer, you can go off and go independent. We don't make it difficult in gyms.
I was going to say, and as time goes on with your faith, have you found yourself reverting in those tough situations where there might be one decision pulling you this way, but your faith will pull you the other way in regards to the business, even if it's a detriment to it?
Well, the really extraordinary thing is that whenever I make a decision based on faith against my own business interests, it always turns out to be a good business decision in the long term because everything's about reputation and when you're known for that. I mean, one of the things that people often ask, as you know, one of the most common questions I get asked is, what's going to happen to gyms when you're gone? Because people know that I look after my franchisees. I'm fanatical about it. And if I wasn't around, what would happen? What I typically say is, well, look, I'm going to be around based on what Google says from another 20, 25 years, which is probably longer than most of you guys. So I wouldn't worry too much. And then there's a family trust set up and we wouldn't become... But the point of it is, people know I'm dedicated to their welfare and they know it from the way I've acted over the years. If you act in a short term for your own interests, yes, you'll get an advantage. Like, for example, if we had a franchisor, now franchisor businesses can be worth a lot of money, they can be worth millions. So we could have a situation where a franchisor has done the wrong thing and we have the opportunity, we could possibly terminate them and just walk away and take... We don't do that, we could never do that. But the point about that too, in the individual situation, it would be very beneficial for us to do it. But as soon as you do things like that, then you lose credibility and people don't value the business as long. They're not as committed to them because they know that they can be taken away.
I was going to ask you as well, with people in training now, I've noticed a few people coming up to you and actually specifically saying, knowing you're a Christian, and because they would say, oh, you shouldn't make your brand, you shouldn't be saying your religion or whatever this way. But I think it's with your founder story, it's well known now that you're a Christian. How does that make you feel when you've got people coming up to you and sort of saying that that's helping them make a decision to come with gyms is because they knew that?
Well, sometimes it could be a negative too. I mean, one thing I'm always aware of is that people of other faiths might look negatively. We have a number of Muslims at the last training too, which had problems with halal food. So I think we were very careful to try and give them what we should to be halal. I don't know. The lady I know I haven't often eat with as part of a group, she's a Hindu. I actually respect that. I probably find it's easier. I have more in common with somebody who's a believer in another faith, whether they're Jewish, Muslim, Hindu or whatever, than I do with somebody who's an atheist. We do tend to think in similar ways.
Well, that's what I think I've noticed is that they know you're a man of faith and that doesn't matter what denomination you are. I think that seems to be the way.
I haven't had a bad reaction. And we understand each other. I mean, God is the same, however you envisage him, wherever your revelation comes from. And yeah. I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but I honestly don't think God minds too much sometimes. I think he cares that we want to have a relationship with him. I think he cares that we act in a certain way, which is very comparable across all religions. I don't think people are going to be condemned for having the wrong theology in a certain sense.
Well, do you think that Australia is becoming obviously more secular? Do you think it's a positive or a negative or a bit of both?
Well, obviously it's a negative from my point of view, and I think it's part of the decay of the civilization. I mean, Christian faith is one of this is by history, it's one of the building blocks of Western civilization in the aspects of faith, especially like fasting, chastity, and so forth, strengthen what we call seed, which is this sort of food shortage thing, change to the physiology. And so that as that's lost and as civilization declines, so that drops away. So it's a problem. I mean, I would have to say if we were successful in what we do, you would find a revival of religious belief, because that's all part of the same process. If you increase this thing we call C, which makes you more open to long-term thinking, it also makes you more open to God. It'd make you more spiritual.
Well, how do you reconcile the Bible? Obviously, there's a lot of good things in it, but there's a lot of, I would say, bad things as well. So how do you reconcile that as a Christian? Or how should Christians reconcile those things?
When you define bad things?
Well, there's like in Leviticus and stuff, there's some, especially in the Old Testament, there's a lot of things which people base their worldview on still, unfortunately, these days. Like, I'll give you an example, like with the evolution stuff, we did a post about evolution where you said, you love, like this book by Charles Darwin, the 8 book or whatever, and you had a few Christians who found it hard to believe you believed in evolution, which to me, I find that very concerning.
But you see, I think one of the problems people have is they don't understand there's a different worldview in the past than there is right now. Like, for example, we tend to treat Genesis 1 and 2 as a scientific account, but it wasn't that, and it wasn't even thought of in that way. And one of the ways you can understand it, if you look at Genesis 1 and 2, they're actually two different accounts, one after the other, in which the order of creation is quite different. Now, if this was meant to be a scientific account of the beginning of the world, then why would you put two contradictory accounts together? But you see, in the eyes of the people who put Genesis together, and this was probably done about 600 BC, quite late, based on very old stories, the important point was that God is the creator and God is sovereign. That's what mattered to them. And that mattered because it affected the way they behaved, the way they treated each other. That was what was important. And in that sense, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 is completely consistent with each other. And also, they're both consistent with the way that I see the world as having been created like 14 billion years ago in the Big Bang. To me, they're all about God is sovereign, God is the creator. The actual details are far less important, but the real message. Because if you think of God as being the creator and the person who gives you the best guide to life, then that affects the way you live and how you behave and how you think about other people and how you think about life in general. That's what's important.
Now, you've talked about your energy before. I'm known you probably 11 years, and I would say you're definitely more energetic than you were 11 years ago. So maybe do you want to give people, you have mentioned a little bit about it, but give people a bit about what's Jim's secret to staying young and getting healthier and as you're more getting older.
Okay. Half an hour vigorous exercise a day. I run on the treadmill. I actually run about 9 kilometres per hour. A bit over 9 kilometres per hour, because I find that treadmill very, very simple, very thing. Apart from that, I walk a lot. I probably walk on average at least another 5,000-6,000 paces a day. I walk all the time, actually. I never take escalators if I can walk. I live next door to the office, which is great, but I'm walking back and forth and around the office. That's quite a few thousand paces a day. If I've had a bit of time, listen to a talking book, go for a walk for half an hour. I just keep active. I just keep on doing things. Even if I go to a doctor or a dentist appointment, rather than sitting down waiting, I actually pace up and down, which I enjoy, actually. I like being active. So keep physically active is very important. Obviously, control your weight. I find it's a bit of a struggle, but I find 16/8 fasting is very helpful. So I don't normally eat after about 8 o'clock at night and before 1 in the afternoon. Get used to it. You get a little bit hungry at times, but you're very accustomed to it. Spend as much time outside as possible. I think that's mental mood is very important. just have an optimistic attitude towards life. One of the things that as Christians we're constantly taught is to be thankful, to appreciate it. We thank God in all things. You thank God. Because people look at, they've got a whole sort of thing going in their life and there's something bad and they'll look at that, oh, that's so bad, that's so bad. But as a Christian, and as a Bible-believing Christian, I say, well, yes, okay, that's a bit of a problem, but this is good, and that's good, and this is good, and this is good, and this is good, and overall, cheapest, it's pretty good. And it puts things in perspective.
I was going to say that influences your business, definitely, because you're very optimistic in regards to your business sense.
Yeah.
You don't tend to.
I make a lot of very stupid decisions. I can be very rash. I jump into things that I don't understand well. I hope I'm a bit learn. I tell you what, I'm 70 now, and if I look back at the things I did 5 years ago, I was this young, callow youth. I had no idea what I was doing. I've learned a lot. And in another 5 years' time, I'll look back on my 70-year-old self. That poor young guy doesn't know anything.
Now, with retirement, we've all got a lot more older franchisees now, but it might be putting off a lot of people because of the pensions and stuff like that. So what should governments be doing to help older people stay in the workforce?
Well, I think compulsory retirement's a shocking idea. I think some people are incapable of working at 35 and some people are incredibly productive at 95. It really depends on the individual. I know Warren Buffett, there's a wonderful book called Buffett's CEOs, which you can't even get online these days, but it was really great. It's talking about the private businesses that he bought, and he bought them with great managers. And the one most consistent thing about these businesses that he bought with these great managers is that virtually all of them were well past retirement age. One of his top managers, one of his private companies, was over 100. Hugely productive. So I think the very idea that you turn 65 and you turn from being an active, vigorous person into this decrepit wreck is just not correct. And I really do think that I am at least as effective now as I ever have been in the past. Probably more so because I learn more.
I mean, did a lot of posts with your retirement stuff, and most people were pretty favourable. Some people were saying, well, I couldn't, I'm 65, I'm retired, I go boating and fishing and with my grandkids and I love it. I don't know how you can keep working. So what would you say to those people who sort of see it that way?
I think it's always important to spend time with your grandchildren. And I love spending time with my grandchildren and boating and fishing, but being in the countryside, yeah, have time for that, but do something useful too. Look, again, it comes back to the Bible, the parable of the talents. It's one of my other great influences. God gives us abilities. He gives us something to contribute to the world. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're working in a job or whether you're working in a charity or you're just doing community work. I mean, it doesn't matter what you're doing. The point of it is, I believe that as long as we've got strength and, mind, we should be out there doing something useful with it. I mean, it might mean looking after your grandchildren, giving a young mother, your daughter or your daughter-in-law, a bit of a break. So you spend time. That's a useful way to spend your life. Or looking after aged parents who can't do it. A lot of women do that too. I just think people should be active. The point of it is too, I think it's morally correct. I think people who've got this, and great, spend your biting and your hoking, but do something useful as well. But the other thing too, it's good for you. The natural fact, it's a well-known fact that people who retire, their risk of death rises dramatically. Now, they may think they're going to have fun, but in fact, we're not built for that. Now, you look at the Garden of Eden. I don't believe in the literal Garden of Eden, but if you look at the story about the Garden of Eden, people think about that Adam and Eve were just loafing. But they weren't actually, they were gardening, if you look at the description. And that's God's idea for us, is we are built to work. We are happiest, we are most productive when we work, when we do something worthwhile with our lives. And I think the great thing about getting to retirement age is that you don't necessarily have to be making a whole lot of money to, buy a house and educate your kids and all the rest of it. You can actually do things more for the sake of doing something worthwhile, which might mean buying a Jim's Mowing franchise, or it might be working for non-profits, or it might be doing anything, or being a teacher, or being a tutor, or there's many useful things. The point of it, in the past, people when they were 65, they were old because most jobs were really, really physical. Now, if I had to go out and build fences at my age, I might struggle a bit. I'd probably be okay mowing contractor. But when it comes to the mind, that doesn't deteriorate in old age unless you make it happen.
Is it encouraging for you to see, we do have obviously 100 people that come through training all the time, the age of some of the people are skewing a bit more older now, which is like Jeff was 79, he came in, there's 70-year-old franchisees, and you do speak to them, so they are out there. And
if you think about it, mowing is also a fairly physical job. It's one of the very few extremely physical jobs. It's quite striking that we tend to have more mowing franchises in their 70s than every other division put together. So why the job that's most demanding physically? Now, some of them don't work full time. Some of them might only work 20 hours a week. The great thing about it is they can still make themselves a couple of $1,000s a week, and they can have a good living without spending so much time on it as they want to, and which is great. I mean, not everybody buys a franchise to become rich. It's probably more common they buy it because they want a certain level of income, but they won't have time for the things that matter, which could be their children or their grandkids or their hiking or their boating or whatever they want to do. It's all great.
We've been seeing a few posts online with franchisees are posting pictures of themselves taking their kids to kindergarten, and they're saying that thanks to gyms, I now can do this when I couldn't before.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? Because I know that's very important to you.
Yeah. I love what a great man once said: no other success can compensate for failure in the home. I see a person who gets enormous wealth, and like John Paul Getty is a perfect example. Built enormous fortune, massive billions and billions of dollars worth. And to me, he was an abject failure. All he did with his money is leave some well over-endowed art gallery for the elite, which is no value at all. And his kids did not turn out well. I mean, what is the point of a life like that? What are you trying to achieve? To me, achievement is what you can do in your family and what you can do for your fellow human beings. That is the point of life. In actual fact, what studies have shown too is that people who have a sense of purpose, a mission in their life, are a lot happier than those who simply live for themselves.
What do you think, let's say the common person, what do you think their greatest achievement they should aim for? Is it kids, or is it, what do you think there could be?
Well, I think both. I think your family is got to be there. If you're not a good parent, not a good father or mother, no matter what else you achieve, that's not a great thing in life. But it doesn't stop you doing other great things too. You can do an awful lot. You can do good things in your job, or you can do good things part-time. I mean, so much of the great things happening in society is done by people who have jobs and do wonderful things. Like one of my franchisees, I think you've interviewed him in South Australia. This is the guy who works 3 days a week as a mowing contractor and spends his time going out and working with the homeless. I mean, what a fantastic life that is. Looks after his family, yes, financially, and himself, but at the same time he helps other people who are sorely in need. And he says that it's just great. They just want somebody to listen to them and understand them, and then work out what he can do to help them. To me, I think we emphasize too much the people who are famous, successful, rich. I think some of the greatest people are those who live very, very ordinary lives, but do so much for other people. And there's so many of them.
I want to talk about tall poppy syndrome real quickly. So we've got a franchisee called Dan Kay who's very successful, and we do a lot of videos with Dan, and it's very polarizing online. Some people are great and they say, "Oh, well done for this man for having a crack," and then other ones were like, "That is, BS, and you can't do that. Stop lying, blah 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 blah." So maybe we're going to talk about.
There's a really simple way to find this out. You ring 131-546. You say, "I'm interested in a mowing franchise." You go and talk to the franchisor, and then he will arrange, or she will arrange, for you to go out on the road with one of these guys, and you just count what they're making during the day. So you can sit there for years saying it's impossible, or you can go out and you can show what they actually make. And it's really quite staggering how much money they make. I mean, I used to make pretty good money mowing lawns. I used to mow typically about 12 jobs a day. Not very big, but I would make what's now the equivalent of something like $4,000 a week. Okay, so but I'm not one of the top earners. There are people who make far more money than I do. In fact, I never made anything like the money that Dan Carl makes. I was not nearly as successful, nor was my service as good as his either. So it's possible. But one of the great things about our system is that you can actually learn from the best people. You can actually go out with them and learn in the field, and they'll teach you everything. And you go along and you become meetings, and you'll meet these people, and they'll talk about what they're making, and you'll say, "Well, how do you do that? And how long does it take you to do this job? And what sort of equipment are you using? And what's your system of bookkeeping?" And they'll tell you everything about how to make this money. And one of the interesting things about Dan is that he's also now a franchisor. And by the way, when he moved from being a franchisee to franchisor, I don't know if he told you, he took a wage cut, quite a major one. But what's interesting is now he's become a mentor himself, how many of his franchisees are actually having phenomenal first years.
Well, why do you think people criticise it so much? Is it because it's a reflection on them that they're not doing as well as him, or they just want to tear people down? Or why do you think that's the case? We do these videos with franchisees who do say how much they earn, and it's very similar comments from people trying to shoot it down all the time. Why do you think that is, or just lack of self-belief in themselves to do the same thing?
I don't know. I think some people find it incredible. But you see, there is this fixed idea, which I find very damaging. If you want to become well off, you've got to go to university and get a degree and become a lawyer or a banker or an accountant or something like that. And you know, if you're not good enough for that, if you're a failure in life, well, you can go out and become a plumber or a gardener or something. Work with your hands. I'm very proud of having calloused hands actually from my farm work. So there's that prejudice in society that somebody who works manually is like a failure and they're only worth maybe best $30 an hour. It's that kind of attitude. They just don't understand that the thing about someone like Dan is he has been a gardener for sure, and he was a good one, but he's a business owner, just as I am too. And I went out and I mowed lawns, and I thought of it as a business. How can I improve? How can I get better? It's that attitude of growth. So I think people, they just find it difficult to cope with the idea that doing very simple things like gardening and cleaning and building fences, they're really magnificent styles of life. Actually, our franchise, we've done surveys, as you know, the average franchisee in mowing turns over just under $3,000 a week, about $2,100 per week, which if you allow for expenses means that they're making, on average, something over $100,000 a year. Now, the average Australian income is around about 75 grand a year. Now, I'm talking the average. There are people who work part-time who make less, and there's people like Dan who make far more. So it's just, people sometimes need to open their eyes to the possibility. But I always say to somebody who says it's impossible, I said, go out and work with somebody. You can't fake these things. Here's a guy actually going out, servicing clients. He'll tell you how much he's making, and you add it up and come to the end of the day, okay, you made this much. Wow, now I begin to understand.
Absolutely. Now, for young people, it's obviously very hard now. It's obviously with the house prices and stuff going up and stuff. So, and they're obviously sold one narrative. And we've done a few videos with this, which people are seeing. But young people, what would your advice be to them as an option to maybe if they want to go, I want to make a lot of money or I want to have a business, what's a good advice for them?
I think the service industry is a great way to go. Now, if you are a doctor or something like that, for example, you've got a great degree, which is a passport to wealth, all right? Or if you're an experienced lawyer and you like that, because a lot of them don't, and that's fine. But a service business is got many advantages. One of the major reasons being that it doesn't take much to get started. See, I hear a lot of stories, people who they spend $500,000 to buy like a fast food franchise, something like that, like a Gloria Jean's coffee shop, tend to work incredibly long hours for very limited money, and you put $500,000 in. Well, you buy a mowing business for $25,000, $30,000, including equipment. It's not that big a dive, and you'll probably do fairly well. Now, I guess the other point of it is, should you go independent or should you buy a franchise is a major question. And look, I have to say, it's not all one way. It depends on the kind of person that you are. If you're the kind of person that really has to do things your own way, a franchise is not good because there'll be certain restrictions. You'll need to do dress in a certain way, look after clients in a certain way. That's just fixed in it. I'd have to be honest, I would never make a good franchisee because I'm too independent-minded. I couldn't be. So if you're that kind of person, you have to do it by yourself. I'd say for most people, there's a very simple statistic. If you go into a cleaning or a gardening business, and you can look this up online, there's lots of this information around, your chance of still being in business after the first year is between 5 and 10%. So between 90 and 95% will fail in their first year. They don't know what to do. They can't get work. That's what happens. With us, first year, 12%. So 88% are still in business. So because we have training, because we have support, and I think most of all because we give you people a lot of leads, we do tend to have much higher success. So I would say, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, if you really want to become wealthy, service franchise is a pretty good way to go. It doesn't mean to say gyms. It could be something else. I think we're the best, but make your decision. One thing I would say too is if you're going to buy any kind of franchise, for heaven's sake, do your homework. And that applies to gyms or anything else. Ring as many franchises as you possibly can and talk to them and get their honest feedback. People would make a lot less mistakes if they did that kind of thing.
I just want a couple of questions before we end today. So with 2023, obviously gyms is on the system, we're at 5,000 franchisees, but with Build, we're
we don't count suspended ones. We're actually at 4,800 and something last time I looked.
What's the plans for 2023? Let me tell people.
Well, we'll probably hit 5,000 sometime early in the year, but that's not the biggest thing. The biggest thing, there's certain statistics that mean a great deal. One of them is attrition rate. So, for example, how many people we're losing. Obviously, we do everything we can to try and reduce that all the time. The better, we're looking at different ways to look after people. We're looking at bonuses. We're looking at ways of recognising those who get 5-star surveys. We're looking at food vouchers. We're looking at all kinds of different ideas to try and work out ways to make the system more attractive and better so that people want to stay with us. Another one is the proportion reporting income. Now, in our survey, which we do once a year, we ask, one of the questions we ask mostly about support, and people ring you and so forth, but we also ask, would you describe your income as good, satisfactory, or poor? Now, I don't mind good, satisfactory, but I do not like poor. Traditionally speaking, we run about 10% poor. The last survey we did last year was 8% poor. Now, I'd like to see that 0. I'd love to see everybody is saying good, but that's probably unrealistic. But if nobody was to say report poor income, that would be the kind of goal. Now, we'll never get there, but if we can get it down to 5% poor, I'd be very happy about that. And the other metric we use is we look at the levels of customer service. And that has been steadily rising with time. The complaint levels are going down and down. We've got some software coming out later this year which should even drop them even further down. So it makes it easier to look after clients better and overcome some of the issues. And once we do that, we know that's going to have two effects. First of all, it's going to increase the flow of leads coming into the system, so that means it's easier for every franchisee to keep busy. But the other thing too is we know that franchisees who give better support to clients, better service to clients, are far more likely to report good income too. So there's my goals. There's not much numerical. It's not to make a certain amount of money. It's not to reach a certain number of franchisees. And we'd like to hit 5,000. That'd be fun. It's mainly, can we give better service to our franchisees? Can they stay with us longer? Can they be more likely to report good income?
Now, the media's a lot of talk about a recession coming up, and I've seen a few comments, people, people, the first thing that they shut off is they're getting their lawn mowed or their house cleaned or their antenna done. So maybe you want to talk about, if a recession does come, how does it affect Jim's Group?
We have several 100,000 unserviced leads per year because we can't find enough franchisees to fill them. We're doing everything we can to try and get more franchisees on board. I have to say, the one way the government can help us the most is bringing about a recession. If I actually voted for the sake of my company, I would vote Greens every time. Bring them on! And let's have a really bad recession and put the economy into a state. No, I don't vote Greens because I care about the well-being of my fellow Australians. But in effect, what's remarkable about last year is that we've had the tightest labour market on record and we still grew 7%. I think if we get a recession, we could grow 25%, 30%. Because what's going to happen is that we're going to have jobs. We're going to have work. We're going to have income. So people lose their jobs and they're going to look around and say, well, there was one year back in the early 90s when we grew from $1,000 to $1,400, 1,400 franchisees in a single year. It's the fastest growth ever had. Why? Because we're in a recession.
So if people are worried about that sort of thing, now's a great time to start and maybe look into a Jim's franchise if that's what they're worried about, because there is work.
Yes. Well, actually, one of the things you can do too, if you talk to your franchisor, ask for a list of unserviced jobs in your region, and they can show you exactly what leads were not taken, how many there were, what suburbs they're in, the whole thing. I do this all the time. I send these reports out to people who are interested in the franchise. Say, this is what's around. Wow. We've given back well over $1 million in the last couple of years to franchisees because we can't spend that advertising money because there's so much work. If we needed more work, we could spend more.
Now, before we end today, what's your favourite part of the Bible? Is there a specific quote, or is there some section? What's your favourite?
Look, there are three passages that mean the most to me. All about Jesus. One of them is the parable of the talents, which is that God gives us abilities, and we need to, even if they're very limited. I'm not as great as smart as somebody like Bill Gates or one of those guys. But with what God's given me, maybe I'm a 1 talent or a 2 talent guy, but he expects me to use that. Not to compare myself, to say, how can I use what I've got to help other people? The other is Jesus washing his disciples' feet, which is the model for the Jim's franchise system. We serve franchisees. I'm not your boss. I'm your servant. I look after you. I'm trying to make you successful. Even when I tick you off for not giving great customer service, I want you to give great customer service because I know you'll be better off. Your income will be better. Your business will continue. And the third one, Jesus made a comment. He said, it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Wealth is very corrupting. And I'm a rich man by any reasonable standards. So I'm always aware of that with the way we spend money. Whether use it. I go through the house turning off lights and things. I hate waste. I believe that the money that we have, what God's given me, which is a great deal, should be used in a proper way and not just used for selfish indulgence, because wealth is corrupting. And one of the things you often notice is that the children of wealthy men become very decayed, corrupted. If you look at the worst Roman emperors, they're the ones that were actually grew up when their father was the emperor. People like Emperor Commodus, for example, or Caligula, who was not his father wasn't, but they grew up in wealth and they were corrupted. And that happens with wealthy households a lot. If you have a family where people grow up in luxury and not demanded too much, they tend to have very, very bad temperament. I've always wanted to protect my kids to that. So both from a personal point of view, I don't think wealthy makes you happy, is spending like that, but also because it's not good for your family and your kids, and it's not right morally that we use our wealth that way.
There we go. So thank you for your time, Jim, today. If you are interested in franchise, jims.net, 131546. And if you are a Christian or person of faith, please have a chat to Jim at training. We do see that quite often now, so please come up to him and introduce yourself. And
I'd love to talk to you about that.
Absolutely.